No, never. I mean, I love the idea. I mean, I wish we didn't live in a duopoly, right? But even like, even, you know, political systems that don't have a strict duopoly, like again, you look at the United Kingdom with the Westminster parliamentary process, they do effectively congeal into two primary camps. You have, you know, the Conservative Party, you know, and versus Labor, right? You have Tories and Labor and everything else. So it does seem to me that two becomes the ultimate reduction in a healthy political system. It'd be great if you had wild cards and stuff like that, where the coalitions, you know, if need be, would fracture more. But I think ultimately things end up looking very much like a duopoly, even if they're not as entrenched as ours is. So yeah, I love the idea. More options would ideally would always be better. As far as would I back a third party candidate now? Hell no. I mean, excuse me, to your high school students, absolutely not. Because I think the stakes are too high when one of the candidates, in my view, is a strident fascist and he's being aided and enabled by an authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle. I mean, when you hear Donald Trump and his attorneys argue in front of the United States Supreme Court that he should not be criminally liable if he shoots a political rival or if he attempts to stage a coup, and these are literal hypotheticals that Trump's attorney bit the proverbial bullet on. Yeah, I think those are official acts. There's no margin for error here. And so I certainly understand why a lot of progressives are demoralized, particularly with certain aspects of foreign policy, particularly what's going on in Gaza with President Biden and the Democrats. But and I could go into it more, but if I had to give like a 30-second thing, I would just say it's just simply the case that Joe Biden is objectively better than Donald Trump. And even on that particular issue, Gaza and Israel, Trump would be worse. RFK would be worse. Jill Stein might not be worse, but Jill Stein will never be president of the United States. On his very worst day in this election, and we're 6 months away from it, Joe Biden will stand a better chance. Joe Biden could just go dark for the next 6 months, like not say a word. We could never hear from the president of the United States, and he will still have a better shot than Jill Stein of winning the presidency. So my recommendation is, if you ever want to try to break the duopoly, now is not the time, especially when, if Donald Trump wins, he's already made it abundantly clear that a Trump 2.0 is going to be is excessively worse than Trump 1.0. So if you're ever going to take a risk, you have to go through real risk management. Is this worth the risk? And I would say no, because you're not going to win anyway. What you might do is put a fascist in power who will hurt you and your friends. Even if you think you've been hurt now, he's going to hurt you worse. So
The way you describe it is kind of how many others, even like someone like Noam Chomsky before, just saying like these are the options, and if you don't do it, there might not be like another chance to even get that third party later or something along those lines. But
Chomsky had a great interview, and I think I know it was around 2020. It may have been even afterwards, with Brianna Joy Gray on the Bad Faith podcast, and he just made the unassailable argument. No matter how you slice it, even if you take a really strict assessment of, again, let's take Gaza out of the situation for just a second. I would argue President Biden's domestic record has not just been better than Trump's; it has been, relative to other presidents, not just Trump, very good, very good. Not since LBJ have we had a president with such a robust domestic platform and successes, to the extent that Bernie Sanders, and I don't think Bernie Sanders is a corporate Democrat, he's still an independent who caucuses with Democrats. He bucks the system time and time again. Even he's like, yeah, Biden's domestic agenda, pretty solid. But even if you grade him hyper harshly outside Gaza, and you say it's still not enough. To Chomsky's point, it is just, there's no way to, if you say you're on the left and you say there's no fundamental difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, in my opinion, you are a liar or an idiot, or perhaps both. There is no good faith argument to the contrary.
two progressives like Brianna Joy Gray, because she was kind of saying like, at what point is it enough? Like, I think she got into a fight with, I think it was Crystal Ball and Kyle Kalinske about this as well, and just saying, it's always the devil, the other guy. When do we not pick evil and pick the person that we should have? What would you tell other progressives?
So obviously, the conversation that argument I would say is still valid, but much less persuasive after October 7th. So that conversation with Kyle and Crystal was phenomenal. It's a phenomenal example because I thought it was so revealing about the nihilism and I would say the privilege that just exuded from Brianna Joy Gray in that discussion. Because again, I'm thinking to myself, I had a conversation with two fellas who do a podcast called The Vanguard, and they're more left than I am. They're phenomenal. I'm a big fan of theirs, but we have sincere disagreements, particularly with respect to electoral politics. And to me, I told them, I said, okay, so I'm a relatively young, straight, white, heterosexual, male, cisgendered male, and I will probably, based on those merits, be among the last to be directly impacted by a fascist like Trump. Although I also publicly criticize him, so I might skip the line. I don't know. But to me, so I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, if we're just looking at pure self interest, I don't really have a particularly compelling reason to vote or to do what I do. I just slide under the radar. But what about other people? What about my gay friends? What about my four sisters? What about my nine nieces? What about my black friends? What about the other people who are not privileged? And to me, it's like I have a responsibility to pick the least harmful, viable option. There are people who are alive today because Donald Trump did not win a second term, be it through better COVID management from President Biden, be it through, a fight for women's rights and LGBTQ protections and things like. There are people who would be dead today if Donald Trump had gotten a second term. And they'll say, yeah, but there are people dead now because Joe Biden is funding Israel's war effort. And if you want to make that argument, it's perfectly fair. But Donald Trump has made it abundant. He even said today, he says it's a cancer and you got to go in and cut it out. So he would give Netanyahu the green light and might even hold his hand while doing it. Nuking Gaza. I mean, we don't know. He could drop a tactical nuke on Gaza. So what I would say is, even though I understand why the argument is less persuasive because of the visceral, emotional impact of everything that's happened after October 7th, the fundamental logic has not changed. If you care about other people and you're an eligible voter in the United States, I argue you have a moral obligation to do the least amount of harm or the greatest level of good. Voting for Jill Stein, I would argue, is not that, because she will never win. If she was as equally viable or comparably viable to Biden and Trump, like if it genuinely was a three-way race and it was Dr. Cornel West versus Trump and Biden, then I would understand why progressives would throw their support and their votes behind Dr. West. It's a mathematical impossibility. So given two viable choices, I think you have a moral obligation to assign your votes to the least harmful candidate. And I think, objectively speaking, that's just Joe Biden. But I've also said this too, as a sidebar, that I support the uncommitted movement. I think it's perfectly fair for people, particularly in a primary, but even in the lead up to the general, to say, listen, Mr. President, if not for Gaza, you'd have my vote. Because of Gaza, I'm on the fence. You can still earn my vote. I am still willing to give you the vote, but I need concessions. I think that's perfectly fair. And I think the president, the Democratic Party, should be sweating at all times. I think they should be like, oh, we can't afford to completely disregard this particular block. So to me, it's got to be a good faith. Like, hey, I'm still willing to vote for you, but I demand a concession. That's fair. That's politics.